It feels now like there's less space for our problems to simply exist. Because when we do have those bad days, it's all the more misleading that it's just us. Having convinced ourselves that other people's lives are better than they are, and we feel more sectioned off from the world. I don't know how pervasive this is, but over the last 5-ish years, I've felt the need to be a bit more secret about my problems, about basic stuff that we go through being a human being. It's enough to be dealing with our own problems as they are, but when we add the extra component of feeling isolated because it's just us, our problems become a lot harder than they need to be. And we can already fall into this trap of isolation by virtue of just being in separate bodies and not being able to see the true nature of what other people are experiencing, and they can't see what we're experiencing unless we become open about it. And so the odds aren't really in our favor to begin with. But now it's not just about that. The problem is a much more modern one that we've added, and we're going to get into that in a second. So it's in these times of isolation that we need that experience of shared humanity and unity. But the modern problem that has entered the picture now is that we feel as though we need to be better than a human being. We need to be more than a human being. And that idea has been sold to us and has been propagated through the use of social media and the need to show the best identity of ourselves to the world. Like, you're probably sick of hearing about social media at this point if you're anything like me, but it still stands as one of the biggest routes to essentially inflaming these kinds of issues. It's less about the social media posts and more about the way that we interpret them and internalize them, basically. This is mostly a subconscious process, but as we're taking in all those posts, we are creating a frame of what the world looks like and other people's experiences. It sounds obvious, but it creates a kind of groundwork that we use to compare our own lives against when we're, well, basically going through a huge number of things. They can be positive, negative, or anything in between. But we like to have a kind of baseline for where we compare ourselves at. So if we're feeling very sectioned off from the world when we're having our bad days and feel as though it's just us and this isn't something of a common human condition, it means that we've interpreted the world to be perhaps in a much better state than it really is. And that belief about the world makes us really want to fit in. And unfortunately, we start to withdraw evidence to the contrary of our beliefs. So when we're forming or continuing the belief that the world is in a much better state than it really is, we seek that evidence. And when that belief has become, I suppose, strong enough, when we see evidence that people really are suffering, it kind of hits that brick wall and bounces off. In other words, we override reality through our perceptions, through our beliefs. And when we think that the world's a lot worse than it really is, we tend to seek out that evidence. So that's confirmation bias. So as we feel more and more compelled to show a version of ourselves which isn't authentic, basically what happens is our true world and this dream world begin to drift further and further apart. And so when we're living our day-to-day life, it feels a lot more sectioned off, a lot more isolated, a lot more invalidated, because we're comparing it against the world we think we should be living in, or the world that actually exists, or how people really are. But in reality, there is actually no divide. Of course, it's just one world. But we do this in our heads, and it creates quite large distortions. So it is just one world, but our inner worlds aren't public, and so we make very big assumptions. For all the people that are really in that storm right now of social media, you really are feeling the negative effects of it. I want this part to be about you for a second. It can be extraordinarily difficult to see ahead of you when you're in the midst of the storm, because you stand in a system built on fear, which is all about the need to fit in, and basically you're very hijacked. You can get very stuck in one specific frame of mind and emotion in this way, and it can become very self-fulfilling in its nature. And so each time it becomes very fearful and you continue to reinforce it, it just reinforces the whole thing as important and as necessary. So it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop proving itself to be right. But at the root, it's simply the fear of social rejection, exaggerated to wild degrees with often many layers of stuff added on top of it. And so we can forget the root of what's going on. Now, people have struggles being real, so to speak, because it doesn't conform to this pre-built picture of the world being in a much better position than it really is on an individual level. And so we feel a need to conform to that, and that holds us back from being authentic. But when you do hear people speak authentically, or if you're speaking authentically yourself and you've broken through all that, it creates the opportunity for true human unity. It's like the little place inside of you that you deliberate with that's very sheltered off from the world finally gets to see the other little sheltered off pieces of the world from other people, and it's like you forgot they even exist, and like you come together and you forget about all of this separation and all this nonsense, and the narrative of basically other people being better than you starts to fall apart because you come together in this authenticity. And that unity always has a potential to be there. It just requires people to tap into it. And unfortunately, it feels like we're in a time where people are a lot less willing to do that. So by doing that, we sacrifice the opportunity for people to feel, I suppose, a lot better when they're really suffering, when they're having those dark days, in favor of upholding a perfected idea of humanity, or this idea of needing to be better than being a human being. Look, I had an absolutely terrible day today. You wouldn't realize it. It's just a guy speaking to you on YouTube, you know, but you can never quite know what anyone's going through. I experienced all the exact things which I've been talking about thus far, about the isolation and the feeling as though there was no space for what I was experiencing. I was like, damn, how did I get here? You know what I mean? It's like a bizarre place to be in. Anyway, I started watching Mark Manson, who is a prolific author and wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. Fantastic book. He was in Australia recently, and there was just a video uploaded on his channel where he's just taking audience questions for an hour. So it's basically people just being authentic and just being human beings in a room, in a safe space for an hour. And for whatever reason, just listening to that for an hour brought back this sense of shared human unity for me. Like, no, I wasn't there, I wasn't in person, but even just watching things like that can spark that sense of shared humanity. And feelings like that can be so immensely valuable in those moments of darkness. It felt like for a moment we all just were human beings. All the noise, all the competition, all of the stuff that we use to abstract each other from one another just fell apart for a moment. And it was like, wow, we are just people. You know, it's crazy to say stuff like this because it just shows you how far we can become removed from the reality of the situation. But this is what we do to live in the world. We create all of these ideas of what other people are to us, and it really separates us. Even Mark Manson himself, standing on stage as the rich, famous author who is really good at what he does or whatever, even that fell apart, and he was just a person too. And that is so powerful. That's so powerful. Especially because in the past I would have just reduced him down to what I said before, those labels, you know, rich, famous, author who knows blah 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 better than everyone else in the crowd. Those kind of crazy, you know, reductive assumptions and labels that I would just throw onto people only would increase the sense of separation between us. So yes, an extremely powerful change in perception took place, and I wonder if we could live from this place more, where I suppose we just don't feel, it's corny, right? We just don't feel so separate from each other anymore, and we all just do feel like human beings again. That would be an amazing place to live in. Imagine if we felt like there was just space for having the problems that we have as human beings, and they finally had room to exist. Because this is the challenge of living in the modern age, is trying to, I suppose, make a stop to all of this dehumanization that we do in our own heads and return us to living all on the same plane rather than at different places and levels. Weirdly enough, sometimes when you're having a really bad day, what you don't need is the ultimate solution to all your problems that you're having, but simply just something like that, just feeling a sense of more unity and less, I suppose, isolation and separateness in yourself. That goes a really long way. So not only is it super valuable to hear people just being very transparent, but if you can feel as though there's no divide between you two when you do that, then that is extremely valuable. Look, I know what dark days are like. I just had one today, and it feels like a kind of compounding overwhelm over the course of the day, and you just get kind of driven into the dirt, almost, without you doing anything wrong. It just happens. But if one person can hear me say that and just really, really hear that, I think this video would have been worth it. Because it's what I'm saying about this barrier that we have when people are talking. We feel this sense of separation from them, and our world and their world are so far apart. But if you can manage to even break down that barrier a little bit in hearing what I'm saying, then you will start to feel this sense of connectedness to, people around you and the world for that matter, that the sense of isolation won't be so strong anymore. It only takes one other person to prove that to you, but as we said, it's less about what the person's saying and more about how you're interpreting it in the moment. Large-scale human unity shouldn't be this rare thing. It should be something that we can fall back on when we need it, and although we do, it just doesn't feel like enough sometimes. I really do recommend seeking out the places that bring about that sense of unity for you. As I said before, it was me just listening to people asking questions about their problems to this guy, Mark Manson. I might even link that in the description if you want to see that, or I might just throw an annotation up here. Otherwise, thank you for watching today and appreciate your time.